Hey guys, Golf Nerd here. In this video, I'm trying to help anybody who's considering building their first sim, or perhaps you have a budget sim and you're thinking about upgrading. So I wanted to put together a video that would help you understand what my picks would be if I was going to put together a sim. In some of the cases, I'm going to recommend very specific products, and in some of the cases, I'll just be making some generalized recommendations, and I'll point out the differences in terms of when I'm recommending something specific. But the four different budget items that I'm going to be looking at, or budget builds that I'm going to be looking at, are a really small budget build, so where you're trying to do it for the least amount of money possible, a mid-tier budget for a 1080p application, a mid-tier budget for a 4K application, and then a high-end budget. So if you wanted the absolute best system that you could potentially get, these would be my recommendations for the high-end as well. So let's just get started. We're going to start with the ultimate budget build. So this is the idea of doing it for the least cost possible. And one of the things I'd like to point out as I'm going through this is not every component that you're going to purchase in this build is something that you can't reuse. So the idea here is let's buy things that we can use as we potentially upgrade from, say, the ultimate budget build to a mid-tier build. Nobody wants to just throw money away. So I'll point out the things that I think you could reuse as you upgrade your enclosure or your simulator, because a lot of these things are modular in the way that they work, and you can just upgrade components at a time and get a completely different experience. So I'll try to point those out as we go. So the very first thing that I would recommend if you're building a budget sim is the Garmin R10. This is just a fantastic unit, especially for the cost of $600. I just don't see how you can do any better than the Garmin R10. It has some issues in terms of distance, especially using the Garmin app. Distance isn't as big of a concern when you start to talk about either E6, where you can adjust the elevation, or even better yet, if you got a subscription to Awesome Golf, which is not necessary, but I hear a lot of very positive things in terms of the accuracy of the distances on Awesome Golf and their algorithm. But, distances is going to be one concern about the R10. The other concern with the R10 is going to be shot shape. A lot of folks report that it's a little bit more forgiving in terms of how much curvature it's putting on the ball, or that the shot shape isn't exactly reflecting what they see on the course typically, and it leads them to doubt the results somewhat. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's just a fantastic value. You can certainly work on your game in the off season, have a lot of fun doing it. I mean, you can play full sim rounds with this thing. So it's just a very good entry-level sim launch monitor. And I can't recommend this highly enough if you're just trying to do it on a shoestring. So the next piece is, if you're trying to do this for the least amount of cost possible, you want to just not do the whole enclosure route. As soon as you buy an enclosure, you're talking about adding $1,500, $2,000 to the total budget of a build. And I think there's just better ways to do it. So in my opinion, just starting with a hitting net is a much better way to start. And this particular hitting net, the Spornia SPG7 for $290, is the product that I see recommended all the time, anytime anyone asks for a recommendation on a hitting net. Now, I haven't used this product. If you've seen my older videos, I had a Rocket net, and I wouldn't recommend it. It doesn't wear very well. It wears out fairly quickly. Now, their customer service is great, and they always replace the hitting net material. So there is a positive there that I want to give a shout out to Rucket for. But it does wear out quickly, and I don't also like the size of it, the profile, where the Spornia, especially with that netting that goes across the very top, you can hit a wedge into this and you're not worried about missing that. So I think this is a better solution. When you see all the feedback that it gets on the internet, it seems like just about everybody thinks that this is a better solution. So this is definitely what I would recommend in terms of a hitting net for your first sim. Next, you're going to need a hitting mat. So this is one area where I see a lot of folks saying, hey, can anybody recommend a cheap mat off of Amazon? I'm going to tell you, this is one area of a build that you just do not want to skimp on, in my opinion. You're talking about the health of your body when you start using different hitting mats, especially the cheap ones. It can really take a toll on your joints, cause tendonitis. It's just, in my opinion, it's just not worth it for a couple $100 to use a hitting mat that's going to tear your body up. You're going to miss potentially part of a golf season when sim season's over and you're back out on the course again. And to me, it's just not worth that for a couple $100. If you don't have that money up front, save up for another month or something just to be able to get a quality hitting mat. The one I recommend wholeheartedly is the EasyT Hybrid. I think it's a fantastic product. It's easier on the body. It performs well. If you hit something fat, you know it. It also gets good spin numbers off the turf. So it's just a really solid product, and it's been pretty easy on my body, and I've had issues with tendonitis with cheaper mats in the past. So I definitely recommend it. The size I've picked for the build is a 4x6. It's $455. I think that's a good size. You might want something different, but I think this would accommodate most golfers. The next component I've got here is if you're using the Garmin R10, you definitely want to be able to take advantage of the free E6 courses if you're doing this on a budget. Well, you're going to need some type of iOS device to be able to use those E6 courses that are included with the R10. And I know not everybody has an iPhone. Now, if you have an iPhone and it's a XR model or newer, it'll run the E6 software just fine. But if you don't, there's a couple options. You could either try to find a used iPhone that's XR or newer, and you could run it on there and not even have it connected to, a carrier. Just use it on Wi-Fi. Or you could buy yourself an iPad. So here's just some refurbed iPads, just trying to save where we can. And these are $270, and it would allow you to run that E6 software. And what we're going to do is we're going to mirror this onto a TV using the Apple AirPlay. What I recommend for a build is to get a TV and just mount it on the wall that has that Apple AirPlay 2 capability. This Vizio is an example of that. So this is a 6 series 50-inch Vizio, just M class, $400. Mount it on the wall, you hit a shot, you look up after the shot, and you can see what happens. It's not as engaging as an Enclosure. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. But it's a lot of fun. I did this for a long time when I had my Garmin R10 set up. It's still very engaging. It's still a lot of fun. You can still have buddies over and play some golf. When you've hit a good or bad shot, and so when you look up to the screen, you see the result of it. It is a sacrifice, but you're trying to do this on a budget. And the good news is, if you upgrade to an Enclosure down the road, you can reuse this, mount it on the wall, and you can use this to display your club information while the Enclosure has the course on it. That's what I did. You don't have to throw that money away. It's something that you're investing in for the longer term of your home sim. The same can be said for the hitting mat itself. You're not buying a hitting mat that you're just going to throw away. You could cut that into strips and reuse that in a full Enclosure as a hitting strip. Some of these options, they're not things that you're just throwing money away, is my point. That's the budget build. I'm sure folks are going to have different opinions on different products, but these are the things that I would certainly recommend that you consider if you're trying to do that. So the costs, You've got the $600 for the R10, $290 for the net, $455 for the hitting mat. The iPad, if you need it, is $270, and then the TV's $400. So you could be all in for $2,040, or if you don't need an iPad because you have an iPhone already or you already have an iPad, $1,770. And you've got a functional little golf sim that you can have a lot of fun with, man. Get your kids on. It'll just be a good time. You can have your buddies over. So I think this is a really great way to start if you're doing this on a budget. So the next up is the mid-tier 1080p build. And what I'm going to start with is my recommendation for a launch monitor. I recommend the FlightScope Mevo Plus. It's what I have. I did add Pro package to it, which I don't include in this cost, but I think is a really great add-on. And I trust a lot of the data that it provides. Not all the data, but I trust a lot of it. The Mevo Plus does have some downsides, but let's first talk about the upsides. So first, the upsides are when you buy this unit, there's no subscriptions, there's no additional fees. You own the unit, and it's designed to work directly with GS Pro. There's not very many launch monitors that are officially licensed to work with GS Pro right now. And the integration with GS Pro is really solid. So I don't have a lot of issues. I have issues with the FlightScope unit, but not with the integration between it and GS Pro. I think it's really great in that regard. I love the fact there's no additional costs. When it comes to full swings, you have it in an indoor environment and you don't have a lot of sources of interference. I think it's very accurate for full swing. The spin model or the spin axis does seem to be a little aggressive, but GS Pro just rolled out a new update where you can not use their spin axis and only use the Mevo's offline amount data. So say you hit a shot and it ends up, 5 yards offline to the left. Well, you can tell GS Pro, just use that and ignore the spin axis. And that particular setting really makes GS Pro and FlightScope even better. I know folks are going to suggest that maybe SkyTrack's a better option, one of the Foresight products. And I certainly wouldn't argue with that. The issue I have with the SkyTrack is that it's not officially licensed to work with GS Pro, and neither is the Foresight. Now, the Foresight line of products are supposed to be getting there soon, but there's a significant increase in cost when you go to the Foresight. You're talking anywhere from $1,300 more than this FlightScope is right here right now, because you're talking an entry price of at least $3,000 or upwards of $4,000, depending on what sales Bushnell's offering on the Launch Pro. And then you've got a subscription cost that you've got to pay every month as well to be able to use it with GS Pro. I'm not going to argue that the Foresight product isn't more accurate. It's definitely more accurate, but there's a cost function there as well. So if you are interested in like the Bushnell, I certainly don't fault you for that. When you see the final budget that I've got listed, you'll just have to make the change to the budget for the additional cost for the Bushnell or for the GC3, and that would be still what I would consider a mid-tier build. But that's all my rationale for why I'm suggesting the FlightScope. Next, I'm going to recommend the Bullseye Enclosure. This is the enclosure that I used, and you can see it in my sim build video. A big fan of this product. I have had zero issues. I think the quality level is extremely high. The sides and top of the enclosure are just really heavy material. The screen is a 3-layer product. It provides a great image. It seems very robust. I have zero complaints about the product, and I think it's competitively priced, especially when you start looking at replacement screens and things of that nature. They have a leg up on the competition in that regard, and I certainly think it deserves at least your consideration. But for me, it's The experience has been great, and I wouldn't recommend anything else. For this particular build, I'm going to say that we're setting up like a 8-foot by 12-foot, kind of a 4:3 aspect ratio, and that would run you about $1,600. Once you get to the point where you're going to be using an enclosure, you're going to want, full turf on the ground, and you're going to want just like a hitting strip situation where you can just have one piece that you're replacing, that wearable piece. So I've got the EZT Hybrid again because I'm a big fan of the product, like I mentioned in the budget build. But this one is a 1 foot by 4 foot, and it's $125. So that would be my recommendation for a hitting strip. You're going to need 1-inch EVA foam. You could either do, 2 1/2-inch layers, or you could just do 1-inch layer. I'd recommend you do 1-1-inch layer, so it's easier to put down, it's easier to cut through, it's just easier to work with. I don't have any experience with this particular product, but it's EVA foam. There's not a lot of rocket science to this stuff, and this is the cheapest per square foot that I've found on the internet, so I thought I'd recommend it. You're going to need quite a bit of it, though, for the size enclosure that we're talking about. For an 8-foot by 12-foot enclosure, you're going to want that gym mat material in your turf to be slightly outside the dimensions of the enclosure, so it's all sitting on top of the turf and on top of the mat. So you're going to need quite a bit of this stuff. Next, my recommendation for a turf for a mid-tier build is the Money Putt turf. This is just a screen grab off of Bullseye's website. They provide this turf as well. When you're buying these big rolls of turf, if you can find a supplier that's closer to your location, that will help with some of your shipping costs. So I'd recommend seeing if you can find somebody that sells this that's close to wherever you're located, which might be a bit of a challenge, but that little bit of work might save you a couple $100. Shipping of these big rolls is very expensive, so keep that in mind. The reason I make this recommendation for the Money Putt, I don't have any experience with this product, but it gets a lot of love on the internet. A lot of folks swear by it. It's $4 a square foot. That's a pretty good price for a putting turf. And, ultimately, you're not going to be putting that much in a sim. You want something that's a quality product. And this, like I said, gets a lot of love in terms of it being a good product, especially for the price. And it comes in 15-foot widths, which is nice. Next, you're going to need a annual subscription to GS Pro. This is definitely the simulator software that I would recommend. I think a lot of folks are moving that way as well. From a cost perspective, $250 a year is an amazing deal compared to the competition. There are new courses coming out literally every week. It's almost impossible to keep up on all the new courses that are coming out all the time. The graphics are solid. The algorithms or the ball flight model is solid. It's just a really great product, and they keep making improvement to it all the time. You can see on the bottom here, you can have an open API, which just means that you could potentially use like the Garmin R10 with this. There's some workarounds. You can use the Foresight with it or the Bushnell. There's some workarounds. But officially licensed products are the Unicore, Flight Scope, and Earnest Sports. Now, in order to run GS Pro, you're going to need a gaming PC. And for a 1080 build, the important part that you need to look for is really the processor. To a lesser extent, the graphics processor is the most important piece, but you're also going to want at least 500 gig to 1,000 gig or 1 terabyte of SSD storage, because the courses for GS Pro are rather large and you're going to want some storage capacity. So this is not a specific recommendation. I'm not recommending this Lenovo computer, but I did want to use it as an example of what's available on the market. So what you've got here is a NVIDIA RTX 3060. This will easily run a very good 1080 experience, which for an 8x12 enclosure is going to look really good as long as you get a good projector. So if you're, wanting to not necessarily go the whole way to 4K, save a little bit of money, 1080p is a great way to go. And this is the type of PC you're going to look for. Just look for something on sale that has similar specs, and you will be off to the races. One thing I will say is the Intel Core i7 processor that's in this particular computer, unless you're using this computer for other things other than golf simulation, you don't need a processor that big. I run an i3, and the loading on the CPU is less than 10%. So it's not, GS Pro is not a processor heavy demanding software package, and you can get away with less CPU, which will lower the cost as well. Next, for a projector, I've got the BenQ 671 ST up here for a 1080p short throw. That's one option. Another solid option is the Optima 1080. They're both at this $800 price. Either one of those for a 1080p build would be really solid. Optima also has the 1090 HDR, which is a laser, and it's, I want to say, $1,400 or $1,500. I didn't recommend it just because putting that much money into a 1080p projector just doesn't seem all that smart to me. I hope I don't offend anybody by that, but if you're doing 1080, to me, it just seems like you're trying to do it more on a budget. And there's some really solid offerings around this $800 range. I'm not necessarily recommending the 671 ST. I think BenQ makes a good product. I like the throw ratio on this particular projector. It should put it right above or just slightly behind the golfer in that kind of region. I like that as opposed to the Optimas, which are usually going to be in front of the golfer, given their very short throw ratios. So that's just a preference thing. But this would be a solid choice, and this $800 cost is right in the sweet spot for a lot of similar costing projectors of different manufacturers. So now for our mid-tier 1080p budget build, you can see all the costs for the different items. For the putting turf, I assumed that we'd have like a 15-foot by 20-foot roll of turf. That way you've got enough ball flight and enough distance to the Mevo from your hitting spot to the ball, and then from the ball to the screen for the Mevo to work as well as it possibly can. The EVA foam, that's enough EVA foam to put under that entire turf. The PC, like I said, is $900. You might be able to save, $100, $200, something on sale, or if you find, something used, whatever. The budget for that mid-tier is coming in at $7,325. A significant cost increase when you leave that first Garmin R10 budget to this. But you can reuse some of those things in this system, which is nice as well. And you could still use a Garmin R10 in place of the Mevo Plus in this scenario too. You could just take $1,100 off and you could do all of this. But that budget build starts to go up in cost quite a bit, when you start to add the enclosure, and that's why I did it the other way on the budget build. So next, let's talk about a mid-tier 4K build. And in this particular build, I'm also going to recommend that FlightScope Mevo Plus for all the same reasons that I mentioned in the budget build, or in the mid-tier 1080p build, pardon me. I'm still going to recommend a bullseye enclosure, and we're going to compare this. We're going to use the same size enclosure for this build versus the 1080p, so we're just talking about the difference in 4K cost. Still recommending the EZT hybrid hitting strip. This is the same EVA foam that I would recommend as I spoke to on the 1080p build. Still suggesting you would consider the Money Putt, $4 a square foot. It's a good product. You've got the GS Pro for $250 a year. The first difference is now we need a PC that can handle 4K. The minimum requirements, in my opinion, and I've got a video on this showing my performance playing GS Pro with a similarly equipped PC, is you need to get a NVIDIA 3060 Ti graphics card. You need 16 gigs of memory, Any Intel processor, like I said before, an i3 or higher will work, and you're going to want that 1 terabyte of SSD space. So this is an example of a PC that would work. I'm not recommending this Alienware PC specifically, but I do want to recommend that this is the GPU you want if you want a 4K experience. And this is the minimum. You can go up from here, but if you're doing a mid-tier budget, this will certainly accomplish that with GS Pro. And you can watch my video and see the gameplay that I experienced with a AMD 6700 XT. And that card is essentially the same in terms of performance as this NVIDIA 3060 Ti. The one reason I might recommend a computer with this NVIDIA card more than the AMD is it has recently come to my attention that the AMD cards do not work with Bushnell or Foresight products. The FSX software that those particular launch monitors use don't work with AMD cards. So if you ever may go to a Foresight or Bushnell, you definitely want to stay with NVIDIA products because otherwise you're going to have an additional cost of replacing your video card. Now, the other thing about this PC is when you buy a PC, it would be great if you could buy a PC that you could upgrade the video card in the future. So say you have a minimum 4K experience now, and that's what you want, and that's what you're prepared to pay for. But down the road, you may want to upgrade your projector, or there's going to be obviously software continues to develop, and there's rumors out there that at some point the courses coming to GS Pro are going to require even more processing power. So buying a PC that you could update the graphics card would be a wise decision. It really is going to come down to how easy is that case to work on and what's the power supply. The graphics cards, the way they interact with the PC, the power supply really determines what that particular computer can support. So just making sure that it's got a big enough power supply that you could upgrade the video card would be a good decision to make. But again, this is not my recommendation. It's just a way of demonstrating what the PC specs that you would need, in my opinion, and a typical cost. I think you could do a budget 4K PC for around $1,000, maybe $900 even, especially if you're willing to build one yourself. So it just depends what your DIY inclinations are, but you could certainly buy one of these for around $1,200 as well. Next is a projector for 4K, and for me, I think this is pretty well a slam dunk for the BenQ. I have this particular model. Its image is great. It does not do 4-corner adjustment, which is a downer. So if you want that kind of functionality, you're probably going to spend more money than $1,700. So that is one downside about the 4-corner adjustment. But the image is really solid. It's not super bright. So if you're going to use this, you have to control the ambient light in your situation, which means you might have to invest in some curtains and things of that nature. But for the price and for the image quality, I think this is a really tough projector to beat in terms of cost. And if we're in that middle tier of cost, obviously we're trying to be smart about where we spend our dollars. And I think this particular projector, you're getting a really good value for the dollar. So going to a 4K, everything from the mid-tier 1080p is exactly the same. The only thing we've done is we've changed the PC and the projector to get to that 4K. And in the process of doing that, we added $1,200 to the total. So the total cost is $8,525. So let's talk about a high-end 4K build. This is, I don't really have a budget. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. And I'm going to spend my money how I want to spend it. And I just want the best experience possible. So the first thing I'm going to say is I would recommend the Unicore IXO. Now you could go with a Foresight like a GC Quad. There is the decision to be made of, do I want something sitting on the floor or do I want something from overhead? I haven't used either product. I mean, I've been on a GC Quad. I've never used a Unicore product at all. But the feedback about the Unicore is fantastic. I've read where folks have moved from GC Quad to the IXO, and they just love the fact that it's off the ground. Obviously it's a permanently mounted launch monitor. You can't take this out to the driving range or something. But for specifically a sim, people love the fact that it plays right, left players, that you're not moving things around. They love the pictures that the software provides and how you can see the impact literally of the club on the ball. So you can see the position that you're hitting the ball, the face orientation, things of that nature, which when you're working on your game, that kind of ability to see that picture is pretty darn cool. So I think the IXO is probably the best in class option for a high-end build. But certainly I can appreciate the folks that are fans of either TrackMan or fans of Foresight. But if it was my money and I had $10,000 in my wallet and I was going to go buy a top of the line launch monitor, this is the product that I would buy. I would still recommend Bullseye's enclosures, like I said in the other sections of this video. I think their enclosures are first-rate quality. I have zero complaints about them. I would, if I was doing a high-end budget like this, I would go as big as possible. So in this particular instance, what I'm going to show in the budget is a 9-foot by 16-foot enclosure, giving you a true 16 by 9 experience. That additional width and height really does make the whole experience more immersive. If you can have a 16 by 9 experience, it's just, it's more usable. One, you can use it as a home theater as well, but that extra width and height is really just going to make it feel that much more immersive. So highly recommend the Bullseye, and like I said, it's a 16 by 9 enclosure for the budget. The one thing I don't do in this video, so the cost of $1,900 is that 16 by 9 enclosure. That's the biggest one he makes. The one thing that you can do, this is a DIY enclosure. The one thing that Bullseye and others offer is pre-cut conduit, or EMT, for building your enclosure. And that's certainly a great way to go. It adds about $1,000 of cost to the Bullseye enclosure. If this is a high-end project and you don't want to mess with cutting your EMT, I get it. It'd be a lot easier not to do that and just cut the pre-cut, or just build the pre-cut EMT. But it is a rather large cost, and I didn't put it in here because I think that's very much a personal preference. So again, we're going with the EZT hybrid hitting strip from SimTurf. It's just a 1-foot by 4-foot. I think regardless of your budget, this is a fantastic product, and I would use it at every level of the budgets that I've put together in this video. There's really no high-end foam, so as far as I'm concerned, the EVA foam that I've recommended for the other builds works for this as well. Now let's talk about the putting turf though. If you're going to do a really high-end simulator, I think you want some really high-end turf. And the Synthetic Turf International putting turf is really, really quality stuff. I've got the MP45. They've got an even higher end model called the MP55. And these products are fantastic. So I would recommend that you seriously consider either the MP45 or MP55 products if you're putting together a really high-end sim. I just can't recommend this stuff highly enough. It's just really, really solid. So that's what I would recommend in terms of the putting turf. Now these putting turfs are not cheap, so understand that you're talking $6 a square foot and up, but they're a really quality product, and just reach out to SimTurf. They can help you with a quote. Regardless of whether it's a high-end build or not, I still think GS Pro is the class leader, so it's still what I would recommend for anybody putting together a simulator. $250 a year, no reason to spend money on something that is maybe not as good and is more expensive. It just doesn't make any sense. So GS Pro certainly is my recommendation for any application. Okay, so let's talk about the PC. If you want to guarantee that you're going to have a fantastic 4K experience, really the minimum entry point for a PC at this decision is the NVIDIA GeForce 3080, RTX 3080. It's the card that you want as the baseline for a really good 4K experience. You could go with the RTX 3090. That would be, even a little bit more power in the bank. But the 3080, given the current configuration of GS Pro and the current courses available, this is going to run that really, really well. So you could say, $1,800, $2,000, $2,200, somewhere in that range is what you're going to be looking at, depending on price fluctuations for a PC and that has this type of spec. Again, you don't necessarily need that Intel i7 processor. You could go down to an i5, even an i3, but I don't think you're going to find very many computers that have an i3 matched with a 3080 because that's two different ends of the spectrum. So you could save some money there if you wanted to. One thing I will point out is the NVIDIA new cards have just been released, the 40 series, which is their latest generation. And the 4080 is a card that has a very high cost for not a whole lot of performance gain. So if you're doing this now and the 30 series is still available, the 3080 is a better buy than the 4080. If you're going to go to that 40 series, you might want to do some research on which one's providing the biggest bang for the buck. But I can tell you from the research I've already done, the 4080 is not the one to go with. The cost versus performance is just not there. So now we're going to talk to the projector. I know Optima's got a projector in this space, but I don't know much about it. They've just come out with something that's very, very bright laser, but I'm not familiar with it. So I recommend the BenQ, the N36 short throw, 5100 lumens. I mean, that is super, super bright. It's a laser projector. This thing gets outstanding reviews. The image quality is going to be fantastic. That with that laser, it's going to last a really, really long time. But the cost is, nothing to ignore. I mean, $4,900, $5,000 basically for a projector is a lot of money. But if you want that really high-end experience and the image quality is of the utmost importance, I think you'd be hard-pressed to go with something better than this BenQ. I'm sure the Optima is probably the equivalent because these two companies seem to produce really great products. So certainly that Optima that I'm not familiar with would be a fantastic choice as well, I'm sure. Just look at your throw ratios and where you want these things mounted on your personal preferences in terms of relative to where the golfer's standing. But this is a great product, and I'm sure you would be just over the moon with the image quality. So here's the budget for a high-end build. You've got, it goes up quick. That IXO at 10 grand, that's a really big jump in cost. The 9x6 bullseye enclosure is $1,900. Like I said, if you want pre-cut EMT, that's going to add about $1,000 to it. Hitting strip, putting turf, cost goes up. Again, when you make a bigger enclosure, you're going to need more mat. You're going to need a wider section of turf. So for this, I assumed like a 20-foot by 20-foot putting turf to put under this enclosure. So the cost of the foam tile went up. Your PC cost goes up. Projector cost goes up. And the total is that $22,475. A far cry from the $2 grand for that Garmin experience, but this is providing a completely different experience. I mean, the level of precision and accuracy from that IXO is fantastic. The image quality that you're going to get on this PC and this projector is going to be, amazing. You're going to be able to practice putting on a very professional putting turf in that MP45 or MP55 putting turf. So this is just a completely different experience, and the cost shows that as well. And for those that have this budget, boy, this would be something that you would not be disappointed with. I can promise you that. This is going to be a fantastic setup. As always, I would ask that any questions or comments that you have, you leave those down in the comments below. I read and respond to every question and comment. Certainly, I think folks are going to have a difference of opinion on some of the products that I've recommended. And that's cool, man. I appreciate that everybody has different picks and different viewpoints on things. So I'm certainly not saying that my way is the only way. And if you do have ideas on products you think would be better than what I've recommended, I'd love to hear that. So share that feedback with me, because I'd like to just stay in tune with what people are thinking about different products. But if you have any questions about anything that I've laid out here as well, please hit me up and I will get back to you. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. It puts my videos in front of more golfers and helps me grow my channel, which is very helpful. And I'd love for you to subscribe. I'm dedicated to producing content that helps golfers. And if you find my material to be helpful, then, subscribe. And that way you know exactly when I come out with anything. Well, that's it for the Golf Nerd. Hit 'em long and straight, and I'll see you next time.